Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sacred Heart Peace Community's gathering at Sacred Heart's Church. We're sitting here with members of the committee and our pastor, Father Vince Guest. To start our program, first of all, we're gathered here to talk around the issue of nuclear arms modernization that is taking place in our country and around the world, and how we as people of faith and goodwill can respond to this concern. So we want to remember that when nuclear war, if ever would happen, it would mean that the world would become ashes. We would lose so much. We're here today to try to speak to that issue, understand the crisis that we face, understand also that just Thursday night, accidentally or on purpose, the president committed a firing of maybe 300 people that worked for the National Safety Board for nuclear weapons. Hopefully he puts them back on today. But we are also here to remember and include a common universal purpose that we all share, that we want to protect the planet from ruination and extinction. We want to keep it a safe place for our children and our grandchildren and their children going forward. And we want to remember, I guess, our own history at Sacred Heart with the longevity of our parish and our members of our community here at Sacred Heart, but also remembering Father Michael Doyle, who was our pastor for a long period of time, and Father Vince, who's currently with us now for the last 4 or 5 years. We also hold in deep respect for the work of Martin Luther King and his efforts to go to every mountain, to not quit, to be of courage and good faith, to keep pushing forward for nonviolence, for hope, and for a new generation. So I thank you for attending with us today. If you're coming in late, we're just getting started. I'm going to pass the baton to Father Vince, who's sitting next to me, and I'll let him offer a morning prayer and a good morning hello.
Thank you, Bill, for welcoming us, and thank you to our peace community here at Sacred Heart for once again gathering us together to continue this great tradition of the Peace and Justice conference gathering we have every year. The conference that was begun when my predecessor, Father Michael, was pastor, and we're happy to continue it. And so I thank our peace community here at the parish and our guest speakers. We thank you for your presence today and your wisdom. And so as we gather and reflect, let's pause for a moment and silence our hearts and pray. God of all love, we come together today with heavy hearts, seeking peace in a world gripped by fear and uncertainty. We pray, dear God, for an end to weapons of mass destruction, for the dismantling of the power that threatens our shared existence. Guide the leaders of the world to choose dialogue over destruction, understanding over hatred, and love over fear. Grant wisdom to those in power, that they may see the value of life in all its forms, and the beauty of all creation, the devastation that war and nuclear weapons bring. May they lay down their arms and work together toward a future where weapons and war are no more. Bless the hearts of all people, that we may foster unity and compassion, so that future generations may inherit a world of peace. We pray for healing of our planet. We pray for an end to all the wars that now inflict our world. We pray for the restoration of hope in every heart. A peace reign among all nations. May we all see each other as sons and daughters of God. May the shadow of nuclear weapons fade from our world forever. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Folks, I want to offer 1 or 2 pieces of housekeeping and initially as we start. One, if you have a question for any of our speakers, We have three speakers today: Sebastian Philippe from Princeton University, as well as Vicki Elson from Warheads to Windmills, and also Seth Sheldon from the ICANW, which is the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons and War. Please put those questions into the chat and direct them to Joe Clementi in the chat. He will curate about 2 or 3 questions out of what's shared and try to pose those to our speakers each time they speak after each presentation. Secondly, if you have, and please consider this, if you have a donation, small donation, $5 or $10 even, to assist us in taking care of our honorariums to our speakers and our tech staff, we would greatly appreciate that. Asking you to send a small donation. You can make that to Sacred Heart Church, but you can send it to the attention of Joe Clementi. That's Clementi, and he will be able to gather that and be able to forward that to the parish, can deposit that properly and direct it so we can make use of it for our speakers' honorariums. Thank you so much. And now I pass it on to our speakers.
Good morning. We feel so grateful to Sebastian Philippe for agreeing to join us today. He's a professor and research scholar at Princeton University, where his work focuses on global security and environmental challenges associated with nuclear arms and emerging technologies. He's presented his work at leading universities, as well as at the American Physical Society, the Lindo Physics Nobel Laureate Meeting, the United Nations, Congress, and the French Parliament. He's received many prestigious awards, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, the BBC, Le Monde, Scientific American, CNN, NBC, Morning Joe, and the New Yorker, to name only a few. Sebastian is working to make our world a better place in his own words, and our world today is blessed by his presence in it, as are we to have him with us here today. It is an honor to introduce Sebastian Philippe.
Well, thank you so much for this very kind introduction. I'm going to start sharing my screen for my presentation today. I'm really happy to be here and very thankful for this invitation. Today I'd like to talk to you about the current U.S. nuclear weapons modernization program. And in particular, I will focus my remarks on a research project that I led at Princeton over the past 3 years or so, looking specifically at key parts of that modernization that are, as you could expect, running late, being over budgets, but also being not properly explained to the American public. So the talk is titled U.S. Nuclear Modernization and the National Environmental Protection Act, and I think this will kind of become self-explanatory somewhat as I go along, but I'm going to get started now. So 10 years ago, the US started a complete makeover of its nuclear weapon arsenal. It's the biggest nuclear weapon project since the 1960s. Just like during the Cold War, it comes with incalculable costs and unfathomable risks. The idea is for the US to replace every single component of its nuclear arsenal, nuclear strategic submarines, missiles, and strategic bombers, cruise missiles, and even produce new warheads. But one thing has changed between, let's say, the first nuclear weapon buildup in the 1960s and the one that is happening now. It is our environmental legal framework. Because under the National Environmental Protection Act that was set up in the 1970s, federal agencies must evaluate the environmental consequences of their actions. This includes considering the impact on the human and natural environment, as well as the related social and economic effects of what they're doing. And that includes placing and constructing constructing new nuclear weapon systems or placing new nuclear weapons and deploying them in in certain areas in the country. So a key question for our research was, how does the US government and Congress inform the public about this ongoing modernization and the associated risks that are inherent to that modernization? And just to give you the bottom line up front, they just don't do it. And that is something that has become very clear, and it's been even clearer this week. I've had students and researchers working with me attending public hearings in New Mexico as part of Los Alamos National Laboratory, explaining its buildup and the environmental impact of the new nuclear weapon parts that they're going to build. And what I'm going to present today is essentially happening again, and it's happening in all the communities that are at the front line of this new nuclear buildup. This project was named the Missiles on Our Land, and it was a let's say partnership that was rather unusual for us between our group at Princeton, Science and Global Security. Nuclear Princeton was a group of Native American students and scholars at Princeton, the Columbia School of Journalism, and Scientific American. And we focus on specifically the US land-based nuclear weapons. So these weapons have been deployed since the 1960s. When the US built them, they built 1,000 missile silos within 5 years. And about half of that, a little bit more than half, were dismantled after the Cold War. But today you still have 450 missile silos that are armed. At least 400 of them are armed with nuclear tipped missiles that are today called Minuteman free. And these weapons are ready to be launched at any given moment. And one of the reasons why they must be maintained on high alert is that because their location is very well known to everyone, including Russia, for example. And so those are vulnerable systems. And to prevent them from being destroyed by an enemy attack, you need to be ready to launch them on warning, essentially. So as part of the big nuclear modernization, 10 years ago, the Air Force decided to replace the existing Minuteman free missiles with a new generation that it called the Sentinel. The Sentinel program calls for the makeover of all 450 missile silos, so the concrete structures that are on the ground that house the missiles, to upgrade the command and control infrastructures for those 3 missile silo fields that are currently in Montana, North Dakota, and one at the intersection of Wyoming, Nebraska, and Colorado, as well as development, testing, and deployment of at least 400 new missiles by 2040. Now, when I prepared this talk, a few months ago already, I didn't have the news that we got this week, which is the Air Force just placed a stop order on the refurbishing and the construction of all the new silos, because the program has run completely out of control in terms of cost and delay. So I just wanted to share that update with you as well. This January, and this is, I guess, why the Air Force just did this. Not this January, sorry, January last year, the Air Force had told Congress that the missile was starting to be massively over budget and beyond schedule. But as I want to explain also in this call is today is that cost and delays are not the only problems. And there are also broader questions about the risk associated with the missiles for communities that live among the silos and also for the rest of the country. One key issue for missile ICBMs and essentially is the main remaining justification to have them deployed. This was in the previous administration, at some point, Jim Mattis, when he was former Secretary of Defense, explained that essentially the role of the CBMs was to raise the cost of conducting a nuclear strike on the US homeland, with the idea that an adversary would need to attack all of them at once to reduce the US ability to retaliate. This is what analysts and even Air Force generals since the 1970s have called the nuclear sponge strategy. That those missile silos in the middle of the country are meant to attract Russian warheads during an attack on the United States to prevent the targeting also of other places, but also to make essentially any attack on the US, to make that attack require enormous amount of nuclear weapons and essentially make it so big and so daunting that they would be deterred from conducting it in the first place. But that sponge strategy also comes with a cost and with a bet, and I'm going to try to explain that today. In particular, when you target military systems that are underground, such as silos, so far the only one way that nuclear armed state had to destroy them is to detonate nuclear weapons really close to those targets. And in fact, so close to the ground or at ground level that any such nuclear explosion would generate enormous amount of fallouts. And this is something we've known for a long time. Already in the 1970s, my colleague at Princeton, Frank van Ippel, with Sidney Drell of Stanford, had run some models and calculations showing that maintaining such force could be very costly for the United States should nuclear war occur, and that 25 million people could die from acute radiation exposure should an attack happen on those places, because the winds in high altitude would carry the radioactivity across the country. And despite this, being well known, when the US Air Force produced their environmental impact assessments for the new nuclear missiles, they did not address that issue. And this was even more troubling in some way, because the Air Force claimed that the study that they'd done for the Sentinel missiles was the largest scoped environmental impact assessment in the history of NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. And within that 2,000 pages, 2-volume reports, none of this is discussed. And so for the project, we did something that was new, at least to our understanding in those processes related to nuclear weapons, is that we not only studied ourselves the environmental and radiological risks that were associated with continuing to field ICBMs for another 60 years, but we went to the communities where the Air Force presented those reports and explained to the public the risks that were associated with the modernization. And what we know was what we learned, sorry, was pretty amazing. So the Air Force picked for its first public hearing on the Sentinel the Fort Berthold Reservation. This is a federally recognized tribes reservation in North Dakota that is home to the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara nations. And as we've learned in that project, there's a fact that was very little known and has essentially never been studied before, was that there is one Native American tribe in the country that hosts nuclear weapons on its land. It's 15 nuclear missile silos, The reservation is, you can see on the right-hand side as a map. Um, the reservation is highlighted in yellow, and all the green dots are the silos, the 150 silos that are deployed around the Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. So the Air Force choose the reservation to essentially release for the first time to the public its largest environmental impact statements ever done in the history of NEPA. And to study and understand better what had happened during that hearing, we were very extremely lucky here at Princeton. I worked with one of our students, Ella Weber, who is an affiliated member of the tribe, was the only second member of her tribe to attend Princeton. And her grandma, which I'll show a picture in a second, lives 2 miles away from, a nuclear missile silo. So this is a picture of Ella in front of one of those silos. This one is called Hotel 9, and it's very close. It's the closest to the main city on the reservation called Utah. So this is Ella, our mom and our grandma. And as I mentioned, our grandma, Deborah, lives on the reservation between silos here. There are red points, H06 and H7, Hotel 6 and Hotel 7. A little bit of background that is important to learn, in this story also is, and that's what Ella tried to understand, is how on earth nuclear missile silos ended up on tribal land in the first place. Who put them there and who did accept to have them there? And the answer to that question is like, of course, the tribe never gave any authorization, and it's a story that is perhaps too long for me to tell you, so I'll just give you some snippets. But Ella's grandmother was born in Elbow Woods. It's a city that is marked on the map, and it's looks like it's in the water, and it's because it's an area that has been flooded by the U.S. government in the late 1940s. Essentially, at that time, the U.S. built dams on the Missouri River, and one of those dams flooded the entire reservation, 95% of their agricultural land, and 95% of their homes. So the entire tribe was displaced. And as they were displaced in the next decade, and as they were rebuilding and resettling to some of a part of the reservation, the government had opened some of their former lands to outside landowner where they didn't have any claim at the time. And while they were resettling, the same companies that were hired by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to build the dam that flooded their reservation were rehired to build the missile silos on their reservation. It's a pretty astonishing and sad story, I must say. And so Ella published as part of this project a 5-part podcast, and I put a link at the end. You should listen to it. It's one of the, I think most interesting piece of audio journalism on this topics of nuclear weapons that has been done in a very long time. So I hope you get a listen after this. She brings you there on the reservation and tells that whole story. So this is a picture of the U.S. Air Force coming to the tribe to present its environmental impact assessment of the Sentinel missile. This was a room where about 50-ish people attended. Most people who attended were veterans who had been invited for the occasion. The hearing itself, can you hear the sound right now? Yes? So let me just redo that for a second. I'm glad that this is working because last time I gave this talk, it wasn't. So what I'm going to play are snippets of of uh, the podcast itself, but the first sound that you're gonna hear is the voiceover of what was presented to the tribe inside that room. So, you get to go there yourself.
There is no audio on this end.
Okay, there was no audio here. Okay. So let me just cut. Yeah, it doesn't always work. So what Ella did when I went with her to North Dakota, and once we had learned that this hearing had happened, we went back and looked at who had spoken that day, if there were any public comments, and turned out 4 people had commented. One of them was Logan Davis. He was a former U.S. Army veteran who had been stationed in Germany, and was familiar with short-range nuclear missiles because they were deployed in Europe back then. And he was now a journalist. And he tells us the story that on the day of the hearing, he actually had not heard about it at all. He got caught by surprise on a parking lot that there was an Air Force general that was coming to town to talk to the tribe and to present its project on the Sentinel missile. Logan was very surprised because he had been covered the media for the tribe for a very long time, and he didn't know why he was not invited to that hearing. He looked up where was the hearing supposed to happen, and he went to that place. And when he arrived, there was nothing. The meeting location, which was advertised in the press and on the radio, had actually been changed at the last minute. A lot of the members of the public that were trying to attend may not have been able to attend that meeting because that meeting essentially did not happen where it was supposed to be happening. But Logan, because as being a journalist, he found his way, got his contact. He has someone that tells him, "Oh, I think it has been changed, and so come in." And he walks in there and puts down its name at the very beginning in the registry. He tries to understand, what this is all about. It sits down, and basically they're giving them a 35 minutes PowerPoint explaining how great this project is for U.S. national security and all the jobs that they'll be bringing to the area. But not at a single moment the U.S. Air Force explains what can those missiles do to the community. And this is where he says essentially that that meeting was absolutely meaningless. While he was there in the room, he was trying to understand where was the chairman of the tribe and where the general, because while the public was giving this presentation and asking to comment, all the kind of top brass had left the area. Nobody was really there to answer the key questions for the tribe. And a good thing of NEPA and the environmental impact statement process is that all the questions and every discussions are kept in the record, and those records are public, so you can find them. So on that day, Logan was the first one to testify. He did say that he was really confused and disturbed by the fact that there was no discussion about the potential accidents that can happen at missile silos, and that it was great that he was bringing it up, but that the presentation did not address any of those risks. There was 3 more people who testified, including the head of the local police that was worried that bringing a lot of out-of-state workers would be as public safety issues for the tribe. There was a woman whose husband was a U.S. Air Force officer and whose daughter was a U.S. Air Force officer who testified that saying this was the first time she was hearing about this in this meeting, that nobody in the tribe actually knew that this modernization was going on, and that they should go everywhere on the reservation, talk to the elders and talk to everyone so that everybody really understood what was going on. None of this really happened afterwards. What's amazing in this process of what is considered the largest environmental impact statement study in the history of the National Environmental Protection Act is that in total 7 in-person meetings that took place in the communities that house nuclear missile silos, the Air Force only collected 18 public comments. When I was discussing with my wife in Princeton, she was telling me, well, I think every single Board of Education meeting we have, every 2 weeks, we probably have more than 18 comments in one such meetings. This is one of the largest military program, most expensive program in the nuclear weapon history in the United States, and nobody knows about it, which is crazy. Ella, was trying to understand who in the tribe had been consulted for that process, and she found the head of the local environmental protection agency. So the tribe essentially has a representative, as its own kind of EPA representative that interface with federal EPA and state environmental protection agencies. And when she met him for the first time, he kind of fell from his chair. He said, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. Nobody has contacted me. I have not been involved into understanding any of that environmental protection studies about the missiles. He had no clue. And he had not been invited to the environmental impact statement public hearing. So even the tribe's officials dealing with environmental protection were not even invited to those public hearings, which is, again, pretty astonishing. So one thing Logan said, and I'm sorry, like you don't have the audio, and I encourage you to listen to the podcast later on. But one thing he said that is very interesting, he said, look, the EIS and NEPA process are there for a purpose. They're there for you to decide whether whatever is the government is doing or sometimes private companies are doing, you need to understand the risk. You need to see if you agree to those risks, given the benefits for you and your community, and that this process needs to function for proper, deliberative and democratic supportive decision to any of those programs. And none of that happened. And so when Ella met him, she asked, well, would you like to know what are the environmental impact? And he said yes. And so this was also part when we decided to kind of do and redo the study ourselves. And I'll talk briefly about our work on mapping fallout risk now. So I mentioned earlier that one of the issues with the ICBM silos is that there are essentially targets they are meant to be targets for the enemy to attack. And the communities that live among those silos would essentially be living in the ground zero area. But fallout do travel far, and since the 1970s and 1980s, we've had better modeling capabilities and faster and more powerful computers. And so we decided to kind of reassess the impact of nuclear strikes on the silos today, and what would it do for the communities there, and what would it do for overs across the United States. And so we developed code and technology to model the direct casualties and fallout hour by hour at essentially the 1 mile scale anywhere and everywhere across the country. And we run those calculations using the real wind data for every day of the year of 2021. Like where would the fallout go should the missile silos be attacked? And who would be, a downwinder essentially. But for those who are familiar with the struggle for justice of downwinder communities that were impacted by nuclear testing, here were orders of magnitudes higher in terms of the impact, right? The colors that I'm showing in the scales here, we're looking at radiations that are in the range of acute exposure, and that would lead for people who would receive such doses to death in days, weeks, and months after exposure. This is not a situation where you will just get cancers, which is already horrible, but this is really a much acute problem. So we did this, and after building, that data set for every day of the year, we went back to the tribe with Villa and our researcher, and we sat down with the head of the local EPA, and we said, okay, do you want to know, what essentially the Air Force hasn't been discussing with you and that has been known? And we were explaining this, and so we showed this map, which combined essentially all our data, and that shows basically that shows the potential, the highest dose that anyone can receive in the United States and in Canada and even in North Mexico, because we looked at that entire grid for that project. And what this map meant essentially was that anywhere in the country, people could receive, depending on where the wind is blowing that day, anyone has a chance to be exposed to really high doses of radiation. For people who are living among the silo fields, the exposure typical that they would expect is 10 times the dose where you're essentially guaranteed to die. So it's, even if they're sheltered somewhat, those places would be gone, essentially. In total, we find that 300 millions are at risk of receiving lethal dose of radiation across North America. When we published this story, and this was published by Scientific American at the time, so Ella got her first journalism contract for this project. When she published the story, she asked the Air Force for comments. And the Air Force Global Strike Command, which is responsible for the ICBMs, responded that the radiological effect of a strategic nuclear attack on the continental United States are beyond the scope of this environmental impact statements. That this was not something they could or they would include in their largest environmental impact studies of the risk of the systems that they were building and deploying in those communities. In the thousands of pages of that report, there is only one sentence that talks about nuclear material. Only one sentence. And what it says is that the proposed actions of replacing the missiles and rebuilding every nuclear missile silos does not involve nuclear material. And so no discussion of radiological hazards of effect is included in this analysis, which is astonishing because even if you're not looking at what would happen in a war to those weapons and to the surrounding communities, the missiles are equipped with nuclear weapons. Those nuclear weapons have plutonium warheads on top of them, and accidents can happen. Fires, dispersion of radiological materials, and so on. And none of that was studied. We had such an event in New Jersey. For those who were around in the 1960s, I wasn't. It was the Beaumont fire accident. We used to have missile interceptors as part of ballistic missile defense that were equipped with nuclear warheads, and one burned in the 1960s, and that spills plutonium all around, and it's still to this day the largest amount of leftover radioactive residual material ever recorded from any United States accident. So the fact that even that type of accidents is not studied in the environmental impact statements kind of shows the enormous shortcomings of that study. Again, it was supposed to be the largest in the history of NEPA. So our next step for this project is to broaden the scope, and I mentioned it briefly, but we were looking at land-based missiles, and we're broadening it to other aspects of the nuclear modernization efforts, and to other communities that are or maybe or will be directly impacted should potential accident happen. We also want to understand how U.S. institutions address their obligations under existing environmental law. We want to explore the economics of the nuclear modernization program. There's always a lot of promises of jobs and trickle-down economics that are, to our knowledge, really at this point, pretty much unsubstantiated. And we continue to advance our nuclear war modeling capabilities. I just want to flag that the United Nations recently decided to set up a new study on the consequences of nuclear war. This is the UN General Assembly. This was voted last fall. And this month they are they have an open calls for people to nominate or be nominated to join a group of 15 to 20 scientists that will spend the next 2.5 years using our best understanding of the science today to discuss the consequences of nuclear war and what we could expect in terms of human, environmental, economic, societal, and psychological consequences. And this will be the first UN studies in 30 years at the United Nations, and we hope to be part of it as well. And I'll take your question at this point. You can read more about this project on the website, missilesonourland.org. There is a movie, 24-minute documentary that was produced by Scientific American. You can explore the data of the map I showed, where the fallout risk is most acute and how it can impact your community, and you have links also to the 5 episodes of the podcast. So thank you. And I welcome your questions. And I hope I'm not over time. I think I have 15 minutes for questions or so. Yeah.
No, we're good. We're good. Can you hear me, Sebastian?
Ask again.
Sebastian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
All right. All right. The first question is from Larry Holman. What can be done to decrease the greed, anger, and ignorance that seems to possess the voters of our nation and our nation's leaders? It's a two-part question. So how can we bring enlightenment to the masses so that they reject these impurities from their lives? They seem to be the root cause for violence in all forms.
Those are two extremely good questions and important questions. They're I would say in a large part beyond my personal scholarly expertise. But no, I would say something, I mean, that is clear, at least for the nuclear modernization that is going on right now, is there is a profound, it's just like, yeah, people do not know about this. Most people have no idea. They don't know how it can impact them, impact their communities. They don't know that it's going to cost, 1.5 to perhaps even $2 trillion over the next 30 years. Um, they don't know that the programs are already way past, have blown their original budget targets and whatnot. So there is really a need to reconnect with the communities directly, but also work with the media to try to make those studies more visible or this issue more visible, and I think that is fundamental. As to the issues of the root cause of all of this, I would leave this to to over to discuss. I think what we can do is lay out the facts, use the science, explain, and take the time to explain and repeat and do it again and do it again until people realize, or at least they can take decisions understanding the consequences of what is going on.
Very good, thank you. Our next question is from Scott Fina. So I live 15 miles from the Vandenberg Space Force Base. This is where the ICBMs are tested and the officers who will fire off the missiles from the silos are trained. There will be an ICBM launch from the base this coming Tuesday night. For many years, a small group of people have protested at the main gate of the base against nukes and the testing. We protest monthly. Usually there are only about 8 to 10 protesters or less. The week of August 6th to the 9th, the number might grow to about 30. We write commentary to local press. We have been arrested at times. Some go to prison. One of us ended up before the Supreme Court of the United States over a protest trespass issue. This was covered on the front page of the national press. Yet our numbers do not grow. People are generally not concerned about the nukes and their modernization. We don't seem to move hearts and minds. What can we do? What can we do to do so? And how do we go beyond preaching to the choir?
This is a very good question. I mean, there is clearly, I mean, and I think everybody in this community knows there is really a generational gap into being involved in that issues, or people who lived through the first Cold War and through, let's say, the freeze movements and so on, have experienced mass mobilizations on nuclear weapons issues. Not all of us disappeared, I would say, from people's mind after the fall of the Soviet Union, of course. I think the risk of nuclear war and discussion about nuclear war and nuclear risk has been coming back now a lot more in those past 2 years. I see my students at Princeton being interested in those issues, reconnecting with those issues. The fact that junior, well, she was a sophomore at the time, Ella, worked on this for over 2 years now and is doing her final dissertation at Princeton on that topic. I mean, is unheard of, is new. There is a new generation of 18, 19, 20, 21 that needs to be reconnected with. Those are usually people who also care about the environment, that want to address issues related to climate change, that or other issues that are important to them, but are restarting to think politically also. I think there was for a long time a depoliticization of the younger generation that never really realized that they had agency, and so I think the goal is to broaden the base, connect with younger generation, show them that they can do things, that protesting is fine. It's part of, it's part of your, what the things you can do to make your voice heard and to make your points known to everybody. So,
Sebastian,
yeah.
this is Bill. So my question is, it's almost like in a three-part thing. Do you have insight into the issue of any country, US, Russia, China, trying to put nuclear weapons in space? Will Sentinel keep America safe? And are Trident and Columbia class submarines the most dangerous weapons that we have, and why?
So on the nuclear weapons in space, it's believed that Russia has been thinking of putting nuke in space right now. US and Russia still have a treaty where they're not supposed to put nuclear weapons in space and on celestial bodies, including the moon. So you're not supposed to do this, but there's been fear that Russia was actually doing that. One of the reasons they were potentially doing it was to deal with the issue that the US has an enormous advantage into its strategic satellite communications and sensor systems and intelligence from space. And if you think about Starlink, Elon Musk constellations of satellites, so one way to fry as many satellites as you can at once is to blow up a nuke in space. So I think this is kind of like a mechanism to try to disrupt this in pretty high-end crisis. I think this is not going away right now. It's a real issue. On the Sentinel thing, I think the fact that it's a stop order that was just issued last week, at least on so the stop order is, the Sentinel program is a new missile, but also redoing all the silos and the command and control infrastructures. What we've learned essentially is that in the original budget, the Air Force said it's only going to cost X, but in X, they did not put the cost at all of all the infrastructures in command and control. So when that finally got realized, the thing blew out of control. If you're not redoing the silos and the command and control infrastructures, essentially the project is collapsing at this point. It's not completely canceled. Right now it's under review, but it could, may never happen. And so at this point, the options are the Minuteman silos stays where they are, and they can stay there for, let's say, another 20-ish, perhaps 30-year maximum. But that's kind of the idea. Essentially, they needed to be replaced, or there could be a campaign and a movement to actually finally possibly get rid of the land-based missiles, and that could be through discussions and are part of negotiations with Russia and the future of New START. So the last treaty between the US and Russia will expire. There's capping and limiting strategic nuclear weapon systems will expire on February 5, 2026. So it's less than 1 year from now. So either we're in a world with no arms control at all, like we're back into the 50s and 60s, and where an arms race could take off, and our arms race will certainly take off, or we can find something else. And it's a little bit hard for me to put all my hope in the current administration to accomplish anything, but this is something they've discussed in the past, and if anyone right now could get votes in the Senate possibly to do this, it would be in a funny sort of way, President Trump. And I want to connect this to the previous question real quick. I know there's a test at Vandenberg that is going to happen really soon, and the NOTAM, so this is a notice that is given to airmen and people navigating at the sea, providing them with areas where they should not be in. That NOTAM shows that the test we will release up to 6 reentry vehicles. Right now, there is only one warhead on each US ICBM silos. The idea certainly is that should New START go away, the US could reload at least very quickly up to 3 warheads on those Minuteman missiles. So that would add another 900 warheads in the deployed US arsenal. But the fact that this new test is testing possibly a new bus with 6 warheads is also an indication that that could be, even more essentially. So, or at least there's plans to develop that capability. So I will stop here. I don't know if I'm at time right now, or if
Yes.
we have.
Thank you, Sebastian. We appreciate all your thought and effort in the presentation that you've made. We're going to, Joe, do you have any other points of reference?
Yeah, I have a statement from Joan Wilder. She would like to know, she said Doge is horrendous, but maybe you could direct it to the huge over budget for Sentinel.
Yes, I agree. And so, but then others have done this. I've already written. There's been a couple of op-eds and kind of short piece that came out in DC and in some of the different NGOs, kind of pointing out to some of those issues. I think it's not a surprise that stop order on the work related to the silo infrastructure was done. It's probably was in anticipation of the Doge review of the Department of Defense. Those are complicated times. I don't necessarily want to advise everybody at this point.
Very good political answer.
Exactly.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you. For all new members coming to join us this morning, having listened to Sebastian, just a reminder, if you can make a donation to Sacred Heart for the effort that we've made, would be greatly appreciated. You would want to send it to Sacred Heart Church in Camden, New Jersey. We can post on the chat an address for you, and you could make it to the attention of Joe Clementi, who is here taking information and questions on the chat. I want to thank you so much for your time. We're going to pass the baton now to our next facilitator to introduce our next speaker.
Okay.
Tom?
Okay. My name is Thomas, and I'm here to introduce Vicky Eleson. She is the what do I say?
Here's the camera here.
I said the camera.
Right here.
Yeah. Why don't you move along?
Sorry, guys.
It can be seen.
Better.
All dinosaurs.
My name is Tom, and I'm here to introduce Vicky Eleson. She is the co-founder of Nuclear Bans USA, and we want to thank her so much for coming to speak today to Sacred Heart.
Good morning. I want to invite you, if you've been listening, Dr. Philippe had some really amazing graphics, and I'm kind of an audio-visual kind of person myself too. So if you have stepped away from your computer and you want to interact more, turn on your camera if you can, I invite you to do that. So I'm Vicki Elson with the Warheads to Windmills Coalition, which is a national coalition of 70 peace and environmental organizations so far. We are committed to a nuclear weapon-free and fossil-free world. Do you like that idea?
Yes.
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 Absolutely. Very much so.
You're getting a lot of nods.
Yay. Okay, so our shared goal is to get the US government to phase out all nuclear weapons and fossil fuels before it's too late. So I really appreciated Dr. Philippe's talk, and I also found that I was having feelings. and I suspect that you are too. It's terrifying, and it's incredibly difficult to hear how bad our government is at even communicating the most basic information to people whose lives are at stake. So I want to just take a moment to address that. But first, I want to talk about what's happening right now with our new administration. We don't know what's going to happen next under Trump. We know it will be messy, and we know it's already pretty tragic. We also know that things can happen that we never expected. If we've learned one thing, we've learned that. Trump has been saying some interesting things lately about denuclearization. Who knew? So one of the things that the coalition did is we brought a letter to the White House, and it was signed by 140 organizations. And it said, hey, you know, President Trump, you've said that we can't use nuclear weapons, so why do we have them? You've also said you want to win the Nobel Peace Prize. So, hey, there's a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that you could sign, and it would set the wheels in motion to negotiate disarmament with the whole world, and you could be a hero. So we sent that letter thinking, yeah, right, you know, snowflake in hell and all that. But the next day, he was at Davos and he said, yeah, I want to talk to China and Russia about denuclearization. We don't know what that means. We don't know what he's actually thinking. But it made us smile anyway, that maybe, just maybe, you know, we had made a dent. But President Trump also just fired a bunch of people, as Dr. Philippe mentioned, at the National Nuclear Safety Administration. And that deploys first responders to nuclear incidents like the one we're worried about at Zaporizhia right now. So, on that. I'd love to see someday, having no need for the NNSA for its biggest job, which is maintaining the US nuclear stockpile. Quote, ensuring that the country's nuclear weapons remain safe and operational. Safe and operational. Sounds like an oxymoron to me. Operational means capable of destroying God knows what. The Trump era will end someday. And in the meantime, we have to keep the momentum that we're building for nuclear weapons abolition and addressing the climate problem, even as we do all we can to reverse all the other kinds of damage that we are experiencing. So I get that we are all struggling with multiple threats right now that affect us personally and our families and our friends and communities. We are losing our functioning democracy. We are losing the rule of law. Lawyers are working really hard to bring it back. And I, for one, am swearing off lawyer jokes for a while because they're really kind of our heroes right now. We're in probably a constitutional crisis, and we may be suffering irreparable harm in our country. So what are we feeling? Fear, rage. It's absurd. It's overwhelming. We might feel disappointed in our fellow Americans. We might feel confused. We might feel despair. And again, it's so unpredictable. It's hard to manage those feelings. It's chaotic. And the overwhelm is by design. People are using the metaphor of a fire hose. There's something new every 5 minutes, you know, and like this is a bull in a china shop of democracy, and they're flooding the media zone. And actually in 2019, Steve Bannon talked about flooding the media zone as a great strategy. He called it muzzle velocity, putting so much out there that the media can't cope with it, people can't cope with it. But I think we are actually rising to the occasion. But it is hard to filter out the big news, the collapse of democracy, from the distractions, although they do matter, like the defunding of paper drinking straws. So no matter what you're feeling, did I miss any feelings, by the way? Okay, anybody got any other? Okay, so whatever you're feeling, you are not alone. We may find ourselves trying to balance being informed with going too deep or too shallow into the news. We may be trying to balance taking action with protecting our mental health. We may find ourselves pulling closer with our friends and our loved ones. We may be working hard to try to accept the reality of what's going on and to make sense of it. And most importantly, I think we may be trying to figure out the most effective use of our individual and collective particular strengths. So I happen to know your strengths because you're here, okay? You are obviously people of goodwill. You are not hiding under the bed. Thank you. You have your, again, your unique experience and skills. And the fact that you're here listening to this means that you are willing to do things. So thank you. This is hard work that we need to do, and it's hard to know where to start, but it's worthwhile. As it says in the Talmud, do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. So I'll tell you what gives me hope. Before the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017, I didn't have much hope. But now I'm seeing steadfast young visionaries like Dr. Philippe and like Seth Sheldon, who you'll hear from shortly, and all the other campaigners around the world with the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. In the world, mostly a young people's movement. In the US, we're working on that. I really appreciated when Seth Sheldon said, look, we have this new administration. Yeah, it's hard, but we have a plan. We just keep going step by step, country by country, building this treaty. And we'll talk about the treaty more in a minute. What gives me hope is people who are dedicated not just to arms control or reducing the threat or stopping modernization, but getting to the root of the problem, really, total abolition of every single nuclear weapon. And that is not something that's impossible. That is something that we can and actually must accomplish. So another thing that gives me hope is people like you who were on this call coming out of the woodwork to say, how can I help? As Martin Luther King said, we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. So when I get overwhelmed, it helps me to just do the next right thing. It might not have results right away, but I know I'm setting good priorities and I'm doing my best. And then I rest and I take care of myself, and then I figure out the next right thing to do. So please just take a moment to think about yourself, your unique skills, your unique talents, what you enjoy doing, how you enjoy doing it. Think about your connections and your communities. What groups are you part of? And then, have you ever done something really hard, like have a baby or finish a thesis or speak truth to power or public speaking? Whenever you've done something hard, you had ways that you did that. What were they? Do you like to buckle down by yourself? Or do you like working with a buddy or a support team or a community? Do you like breaking it down into little steps and then maybe giving yourself some kind of treat at the end of each step, a bit of chocolate or a hooray or something? Maybe you like to repeat a mantra to yourself to keep your spirits up. Here's a mantra I like from Audre Lorde. I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. That one keeps me going some days. So this is no time to be shy. It's time to pull up our socks, pull out all the stops, pull together. And I want to invite you to next learn about warheads to windmills and hopefully take some inspiration from that, perhaps some guidance, definitely some solidarity and some camaraderie. And let me tell you about that. So as I said, our shared goal is to get the US government to phase out all nuclear weapons and all fossil fuels before it's too late. We are working on every level. You'll hear from Seth Sheldon more about the international level, and we'll talk about that a little. But as I said, we approached the president. We've been approaching every president for a while. And we lobby Congress pretty robustly. We're working at the level of state governments, cities, towns, organizations, civic institutions, banks, businesses, universities, faith communities. Maybe that's you. Maybe Sacred Heart wants to take collective action, and you can. That's actually really powerful when faith communities do that. So it would be really elegant if we were to abolish nuclear weapons and then take all those wasted trillions of dollars and all that scientific brain power and all that infrastructure and convert it over to evidence-based climate solutions. This is my Paleolithic PowerPoint system here. So there's a little chart. The money, the brain power, the jobs, shift them over to climate solutions. Also the international goodwill that we need to come to climate solutions is really hard to achieve when we are all pointing nuclear weapons at each other. And that looks like, oh, I'll find it in a minute. Okay, that looks like this. These are the top greenhouse gas emitters. And you can see that they're all pointing nuclear weapons at each other. We need to stop demonizing and dominating each other, and we need to work together to solve these global problems. We have to. The jobs we could create are exciting. I love this because it shows the nuclear weapons jobs that we calculated a few years back and where they are in the US. And then it like the Wizard of Oz, it goes from black and white to color. These are sustainable energy jobs, renewable resources. You may notice that there's a lot more jobs, and they're good jobs. So we call that turning warheads to windmills, and we can do it if we only have the political will, which we will talk about. So warheads to windmills, or wind turbines, if you want to be accurate but not have alliteration. Warheads to windmills, we call that feeding two birds with one scone. I want to tell you my favorite story. 2017, I was on my fourth date with a guy I met on the internet. That's how we all meet each other now. And he was working on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons at the United Nations. And so he took me there on our fourth date. I'd known the guy like 2 weeks, you know, and I happened to be there the day that 122 countries adopted the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. 122 countries. Not the nuclear weapon states, unfortunately, but this treaty is not between the nuclear weapon states like previous treaties. This treaty is from the world to the nuclear weapon states, saying we have had enough. So that was extremely exciting. The treaty outlaws everything to do with nuclear weapons in the ratifying countries. I met some really interesting people there, obviously. One of whom, Setsuko Thurlow, you can see here in the red, celebrating when the treaty vote happened. Okay, when she was a little girl, she was in Hiroshima, and she was in a building that collapsed, and she could hear her schoolmates dying around her. And she heard a voice saying, "Just keep crawling towards the light." And then 6 months after the treaty, she was one of two people who accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And she said, in the rubble, they said, "Just keep crawling towards the light." And our light is now this nuclear ban treaty. Okay, so my life changed. Whatever I was doing before, I'm doing this now. So I'm new to this. I'm not a lifelong activist like many of you probably are, but I'm pretty excited about it. So far, 73 countries have ratified the treaty. It's only been since it just came into force 4 years ago. 25 more have signed it and are moving towards ratification. And that's 98 countries. That's half the world. Okay? So it offers a framework for fair and relatively safe and no cheating elimination of every single nuclear weapon on Earth. It's a beautiful document. It's not very long. I invite you to read it. It will make you feel nice. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So what's fun also is looking at how countries are implementing the treaty. It's up to each country to decide what laws to pass to ban everything to do with nuclear weapons in their country. Ireland is kind of our favorite right now. In Ireland, if you have anything to do with nuclear weapons, you can theoretically go to jail for the rest of your life. That's a good use of prisons, in my opinion. And if all the countries implement it that way, it's going to be really hard to continue business as usual because the companies that make these things have offices and facilities and suppliers all over the world. So it's going to make it harder for them to do business the way that they're used to doing. So we also have a fossil fuel treaty. Have you heard about the fossil fuel treaty? Okay, that's because it doesn't exist yet, but we're working on it, and that's very exciting as well. And at the next meeting of states parties of the Nuclear Ban Treaty, we will be working together with the Fossil Fuel Treaty, which they're modeling on the Nuclear Ban Treaty. So that's very exciting. Those two treaties give a lot of credibility to the efforts of the world to solve these two existential threats. So what's our theory of change? The US is key to stopping both man-made existential threats. We are a reckless greenhouse gas emitter here in the US, and we're the most dangerous and the most pivotal nuclear weapons nation. We invented nuclear weapons. We're the only country ever to have used them in war. Generations of our own citizens, some people I know, are still dying from uranium mining and radioactive bomb testing. The US federal government could lead the world to end what Oppenheimer and big oil started. And I believe that as Americans, that is our moral duty. In the US, we have a pending federal bill that would do exactly what we want. It would convert nuclear weapons resources to climate solutions. It's called the Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Conversion Act. This is Eleanor Holmes Norton, Congresswoman from DC, with Beatrice Finn of ICANN and the Nobel Peace Prize, and Timon Wallace, who you'll hear about in a bit. He's my co-founder of Nuclear Ban and the other stuff. So that piece of legislation is magnificent. And we've gotten a few members of Congress to support it, but not enough, not anywhere near enough. It's kind of mostly symbolic at this point. It's for movement building. And the reason that it's so hard to get more members of Congress on board is very simple. It's because corporations make a large amount of money for a small number of people, and they bribe Congress. So bribery and corruption are legal in America, and as you can tell, getting worse. As long as big money and big oil in the military industrial complex have so much more influence over our politicians than we do, we can't get very far. They control most members of Congress with campaign contributions, revolving door jobs in the industry. When they leave Congress, they go get a cushy job. We may be stuck forever with these ever escalating dangers. And I've seen it with my own eyes, but there's an unless coming, so hang on. Okay, so I did this crazy thing. I wanted to know what the members of this industry say to each other when they're alone together. So I got a press pass and I spent 3 days in a hotel basement near the Pentagon with 530 corporate contractors, government officials, military brass, White House representatives, a couple of members of Congress. It was a giant love fest called the annual Deterrence Summit. Okay. And I put deterrence in quotes because, in fact, nuclear deterrence is not a fact. It's a false narrative. It's a cause of global insecurity. We have just been extremely lucky so far, and we are not getting safer. It's a planetary game of chicken, really, a psychological game with accident-prone missiles on hair trigger alert, as you saw in Dr. Philippe's terrifying maps. It's it's unthinkable. What could possibly go wrong with, with all that? So I went to this thing. My husband told me I would need therapy if I went, and he was right. When I was there, I heard things like this, quote, "My job is to keep nuclear safety off the critical path of your mission." Quote, "Congratulations, Northrop Grumman, on the unveiling of your new stealth bomber. It's fantastic. Y'all should have a poster of it on your wall." I heard people talking about how, well, we've kind of, we're okay with Russia, but China's the next big threat. They're just rationalizing with this fake patriotism, their own greed and their own persistence in pushing these myths at the rest of us that we actually need these things to be safe. I heard something interesting in the elevator. I asked somebody, so, I'm a reporter. I said, "So what brings you here?" She said, "Oh, like everybody else, the money." Everybody was happy about the perpetual, bottomless, bipartisan federal funding. Happily, I also heard the director of the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, Kim Budil, say the following, quote, "We have capability because of our nuclear weapons work. What other challenges can we apply our capabilities to? Climate? Environment? We can apply our science and engineering skills to whatever's important in the nation." Yay, warheads to windmills. So we are stuck with these problems unless, what if the companies, here they are, these are some of the main nuclear weapons companies. There's not that many of them, actually. And here are some of the fossil fuel companies that spend the most money lobbying Congress. Okay. What if the companies themselves changed course? What if they were suffering so much divestment from us, all of us, all over the world? What if they were suffering so many boycotts of their products, nuclear or not? What if they were suffering so much damage to their precious reputations that they asked the government to help them stay profitable doing something maybe sustainable? What if? It's a long shot, but it's not pie in the sky. It's a strategy that has worked in the past for Gandhi, for apartheid, for civil rights, and many other things. Citizen boycotts back in the 80s got Westinghouse, Morton, Ford out of the nuclear weapons businesses and other companies as well, and may have changed the course of history. So why did Reagan shift gears in his second term? In his first term, he was talking about the evil empire. Okay, this is the first term up here on top. Okay. He was talking about the evil empire. Nuclear buildup was going full blast. There were high tensions. What were we doing? Or actually, more you. You were probably doing more of this work than I was at the time, some of you. Nuclear freeze. 1 million people marched in New York City. The Day After movie came out. Still, we had the arms race. And then, in his second term, he met with Gorbachev. He signed the INF Treaty. He proposed having 0 nuclear weapons on the planet. What made that difference? Well, what were people doing? Nuclear-free zones, boycotts, and citywide divestment. So that's this is what nuclear-free zones looked like in the 80s. They were all over the country, and in these places, you couldn't have anything to do with nuclear weapons within your jurisdiction and control. You may remember the Morton salt boycott. People stopped buying Morton salt when it rains, it pours, because they also had Morton Thiokol, which was involved in the nuclear weapons business. They got out. Okay, the most interesting story, though, I think, is General Electric. And General Electric they were the biggest corporation in America at the time. And they were also the biggest nuclear weapons contractor at the time. And they made both nuclear weapons and, you guessed it, light bulbs. We bring good things to life, right? And they suffered a consumer boycott of their light bulbs. even if they gave them away for free, store owners were saying, I'm still not going to sell your light bulbs. People were adamant about it, and it was very bad public relations for them. So Ronald Reagan, who had been a spokesman for GE, was probably moved by that or by them. And then we had this shift where it started looking possible to vastly reduce the number of nuclear weapons on the planet. It would have been good to get them to zero, but we still can. And so in Washington, D.C., last week, we did a very interesting thing. We went 2 weeks ago, right after the inauguration, we went to DC and we did a lot of lobbying and we did some demonstrating and we did a public event with Seth Sheldon and also with Jim McGovern, our congressman, who, by the way, is a strong abolitionist. He's a real leader, but he wasn't before. He became an abolitionist after we became frequent and possibly annoying visitors to his office. But he's really a champion now. And so we did all those things, but also while we were in DC, that's also where the headquarters of a lot of the nuclear weapons companies are. So we went and visited them. It's very hard to get in. We tried to make appointments, they never wrote back, but we walked right into Boeing and we asked to speak to a public relations person, and we got one. And we explained to him how Boeing is facing legislative risk from the treaty. They're facing regulatory risk. They're facing reputational risk. And God knows, Boeing has some reputational problems right now. Their airplanes are falling out of the sky. They need some good PR. So we, because we're helpful, we shared with them that their product is in violation of the international law of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, signed by the whole coalition. And the poor guy, he was, I think, new at the job, and he kept saying, well, we stand by all of our, products in our portfolio here at Boeing. But we could see that he was actually shaking, so they know that we're watching, and that's important. We have a dream of a world without nuclear weapons and fossil fuels. That's our dove of peace. And we also have a dove with teeth. We have treaties, we have divestment, we have boycotts, laws, stigmatization, hopefully a mass movement. Okay, I hope that doesn't frighten you. I had fun making that picture. So, we can't just be doves of peace. We need to really be clear and firm about what we demand. So imagine pressuring the profiteers with intense divestment, boycotting, and stigmatization, plus international treaties that put pressure on those same corporations in other countries. Okay, so from within, from outside the country. That might be our best hope. So now I know you're asking yourself, what can I do? Good. Okay. So you might say, can my faith community, like maybe Sacred Heart, declare itself in alignment with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and divest all of our funds and boycott the companies, maybe not buy Honeywell products for our, church or whatever. And then we could write to them and tell them why we're divesting and boycotting and let them know that we're watching as a faith community. So yeah, you can definitely do that. Our Quaker meeting did that. We made ourselves a certificate of treaty alignment, and that was and we had very interesting correspondence with one of the corporations. They said, we don't have anything to do with nuclear weapons. We said, well, actually you do. And we had this whole relationship, it was interesting. They know we're watching. You might be asking yourself, can I get my city to divest and refuse contracts with these companies? Can my city divest its pension funds like New York City did? Yes, of course you can. Okay, Seth was part of this. And Warheads to Windmills, people gave testimony, And this is a very exciting development. Maybe Seth can tell you more about that. You may be asking yourself, can my network write a bunch of strongly worded letters to politicians and CEOs? Yes, you can. And on the Warheads to Windmills website, we have all kinds of tools for doing that, tailored to each company, to each member of Congress. We've done the homework on that to make it easy for you. You might say, can my neighbors visit our state and federal legislators in person? Absolutely. Call them, write them, and show up. They really like hearing from their own constituents. So if you want to influence a member of Congress who is not your particular representative, try to find one of their people and bring them with you on Zoom or in person or on a letter or call or whatever, however you do that. That is powerful, and they do listen. You might say, how can I divest my own funds? Yeah, we can help you with that. We've got a financial expert who is happy to help people for free. You might say, how can I teach my students that deterrence is not a thing, that nuclear weapons are stupid, expensive, and dangerous, and that we should dismantle every single one of them forever? Yeah, we got a lot of resources for that. This book, the entire book is on the website for free. You can also get a paper copy, but you can just read the whole thing if you want to. It has 1,000 footnotes, and it talks about how we can actually do this. And Timon Wallace, who happens to be the guy that I went on that date with and that I married because, of course, he is writing another book now about how nuclear abolition can happen step by step. So that's exciting. Another thing you might be asking yourself is, can I get my hospital to stop buying nuclear medicine machines from companies that also make nuclear weapons of death? The answer is yes. We're working on a couple of hospital systems, and we would really love to see more people doing that. So that's another great thing you can do. So right now you've got a whole bunch of ideas, and it's up to you to figure out what is your next right thing to do. And I want to just share my screen with you and show you a little bit about the Warheads to Windmills website. Let's see. This might take me 1 second. Okay, Zoom. Okay, here we go. Okay, there's the website. Warheadstowindmills.org. Okay, and as you can see, we are a demand, we're a book, we're a campaign, we're a coalition, we're a lot of things. Warheads to Windmills is not an organization. It is a collective effort of a whole bunch of organizations. It is supported by a couple of nonprofits, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. So this is our very clear demand, Warheads to Windmills. This is some of the resources we have. And so if you want to, if you're part of an organization and you want to join the coalition, you can easily do that. Joining the coalition is under coalition. Okay, why isn't it coming up? Okay, there we go. So you can join as an organization here. You can also join as an individual. These are our coalition partners. There's a whole lot of them. You can see the Catholic Worker in there and all kinds of Veterans for Peace, Code Pink, all kinds of peace projects. Do you know if anybody around you is part of it in New Jersey? I meant to look that up before I came on today. But you certainly can be. And also as an individual, you can sign up, read the newsletter, which comes not that often, and stay abreast of actions that you can take. Under campaign, we have at the national level, Congress. Here's the bill, and we are currently updating it working with Representative Holmes's office, Congresswoman Holmes. These are the endorsements that it has received. And then if you want to write to your member of Congress, you can do that here and you'll find all kinds of tools for doing that. So I'm just going to show you this real quick. You can look at it on your own time. If you go to How to Pressure the Profiteers, you will see all kinds of things there. Yeah, let me just click on that for a second. Companies, actions at the companies, there's just all kinds of ways to pressure the profiteers. So that's a useful thing you can do. And you can also consider donating to ICANN and also to the people who put on this webinar today at Grace Church and, excuse me, at Sacred Heart. And you can also donate to the organizations that are behind the scenes doing things like producing toolkits and resources, doing all kinds of research, coordinating campaigns, going to endless meetings, managing databases and websites, and typing and filing and fixing the printer and all kinds of other things that maybe you're glad you're not doing right now. So there's a nonprofit way and a with tax deductible, and there's another way that is not tax deductible that's more for activism, advocacy. So that's where that is. Okay, do I still have any time?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, then here's the ICANN website. Please visit their website. It's really great. All kinds of good stuff there. Use the search tool here and you can and resources and updates. You can find details about all the companies and actions. And it's really great to be part of the world working on this. In America here, it's a bit of an uphill slog at the moment, but we are part of an international movement full of energetic people, and it's beautiful. So come hang out on this website, and Seth will tell you more about that. So it is an honor for me to be sandwiched in between experts like Sebastian and Seth. I am not so much an expert. I am just a person who cares, but I do hang out with experts and I'm on a really steep learning curve. So I'd like to introduce you very briefly to one of those experts. This is the renowned futurist, Junie Petunia, and she's going to share with you how the treaty gives her fresh hope.
The whole world is signing a treaty to say, you see the distance are going away. Yeah, a treaty.
Yes. Let's go past the states and migrant.
Okay. Stop sharing. Okay.
Very good.
I think I stopped sharing, I hope.
Yes, you have.
Good. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. You have the name there of the person to whom to address your questions. And happy to do my best to help. And if I don't know, I can try to find out. Thanks for being here, everybody. I know it's your Saturday morning. Thank you.
All right, ready?
Yeah.
Hi, Vic. It's Joe Clementi. We do have a question for you here. It says, how can we organize against the super rich and the oligarchs?
That's kind of the burning question right now on every single issue in America and in the world. Well, our strategy, our theory of change is to go after them. Let them know that we're watching, let them know we care. Right now, we are seeing the takeover of our government by oligarchs. 3 of the world's richest men sat behind the president on Inauguration Day, and And they're, as you have seen, probably giving speeches from the Oval Office and unelected. And I think, you may have other ideas. I think our best hope is going through legal channels, through the courts, through lawyers, who are working really hard and could really use whatever support we can give them. We need to contact our members of legislature. We need to work at the local level as well. It's just all of it. We just have to pull out all the stops. There's no guarantee that we're going to succeed at stuff, but our very best shot. And as I say, I'm the cheerful, hopeful person, and I stand by my cheerfulness. But I do think that we cannot lay low and hope for the best. So write letters, make phone calls, get out in the streets, keep pressuring the oligarchs. Anybody else? I'd actually be interested in hearing how other people want to answer that question as well.
All right. I have a question for you, Vic. It's Project 2025 calls for starting to test nuclear weapons in the atmosphere again, and I was just wondering. I know we used to do it in Nevada and in the Pacific. Do you know where they would possibly be doing that if that was to happen again?
I am not an expert on that. I know Nevada, the Nevada test site they're talking about reactivating it, I think. I would defer to Professor Philippe about that, or to Mr. Sheldon.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Let me take a look.
But it's a really, really bad idea. It's like the worst idea ever,
Yes.
as you know.
All right. And that was the last question that we had for you right now.
Okay.
Vicki, do you have I know that you stood in a form of a standing in protest in front of the White House, you and Timon and Sister Carol Gilbert. Do you have a picture of the three of you standing? And I think that's part of the idea is to stand, to go someplace and stand there, become a presence.
Yeah, I think Sister Carol is on this call. She is just so wonderful in so many ways. I can take a moment and try to find that. Hang on just a second.
I sent it to you, to your phone.
Oh, you did. To my phone. Let me try. Yes, you did. Let me try to find that. I don't think I can find it fast enough to not have people get bored.
I understand.
But maybe when Seth is speaking, I will dig it up and share it with you later on.
Very good. Well, if we are finished with any of the questions for Vicki Elson, I would suggest that we would move on, and I will introduce our next speaker, who's going to be Seth Sheldon. Seth is a lawyer, one of the good ones. He's officially a Fulbright scholar by his history. And he's also one of the counsel for the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons. And he's been involved with them for a good period of time. ICANN was started in 2007, and in 2017, or 10 years later, they received the International Nobel Prize for Peace for their efforts to abolish and end nuclear weapons on the planet. Seth, I've met and known him over the last 5 years or so. He stays focused, and he's unwavering in his commitment to pursue an end to nuclear weapons. He has a concern for humanity that keeps taking him places beyond the normal for so many of us. We appreciate Seth being with us today. He possibly even has been able to bring his copy of the Nobel Prize that he received, that I saw once upon a time when I was with him in New York. Seth, if you're there, tag, you're it.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And beyond the normal is a new descriptor for me, but I think it's fun for me to reflect on, because I think a lot of what we're doing is making normal an objective that I think has been elusive for too long, which is the simple agreement that nuclear weapons, given that they stand as the most acute existential risk to humanity and our natural environment, must be eliminated, and we need more support to build the pathway to do it. And that pathway is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which I'll tell you a bit about more as a quick refresher, but Vicky already spoke about it as well. So I can probably move past that part a little bit. But I've been it's been really great also to listen to both Sebastian and Vicky, who are such strong partners, and I think really demonstrate the the breadth of our work, in the sense that, you know, we have the scientific expertise, and we have the community activism and optimism that is the path to our success. And although not represented here in the same way, we have the most powerful testimony of the true experts on nuclear weapons, which are those who have been affected by nuclear weapons use, notably celebrated this year through the Nobel Prize for this year being given to Nihon Hidankyo, representing survivors of the U.S. atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But I'll say a little bit more about this too. Those affected by nuclear weapons, of course, and Sebastian, of course, showed us how are not just limited to those who have suffered from those attacks, but rather from the entire nuclear weapons complex, and the policy that that complex relates, that sort of supports that complex. I was reflecting how the last time, yeah, I have joined the Coalition for Peace Action gathering once before, and it was in 2020, in December of 2020, where I was invited to give your keynote address at another important moment, and it was great to be with you then. And now I'm reflecting throughout this morning that this is 5 years later, and so how the context has changed. And in 2020, it was December of 2020, and I was asked to join you to celebrate the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that was about to happen. The treaty entered into force on January 20th, 2021. And it had been triggered, if you will, or brought about by the 50th country to deposit their ratification to the TPNW, which happened in October. So, you know, I remember saying then that we were all there to celebrate this milestone, but of course that was not the end of the struggle. It was just an important, I think, marker in the struggle. The first time, you know, 75 years after nuclear weapons were invented and used, that we were finally had a global treaty, the first ever treaty that comprehensively prohibits nuclear weapons, as Vicky said, everything to do with nuclear weapons. And so now it's 5 years later. That was the year of the 75th anniversary of the U.S. bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it was the year of the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the UN, which was founded with the purpose of, you know, saving, I think something like saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war. And just as many years since the UN's first General Assembly resolution, which was to eliminate nuclear weapons from national arsenals. So now we're in the 80th year. And those experts who survived the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we have them not for much longer, inevitably, and we have that expertise and that direct testimony for not that much longer. And so it's becoming increasingly urgent for that reason, also many other reasons, that we advance the work that we're doing, and that we all get behind it. I remember saying then that the next stage of the work wouldn't be easy. That of course, the way the plan is structured that we designed is that after many years of asking the nuclear armed states to just give up their weapons, after decades of doing that, we knew that we would need push from the rest of the global non-nuclear weapons community to unite behind a treaty that banned nuclear weapons, to actually build that pressure. And that's what we've been doing. And we knew that this next stage, it wouldn't be like, the US and Russia just signed the treaty the next day, but rather that we needed to build this structure and then push. And I think, I'm sure there are some historians in the room and who could probably, I hope, support this idea that progress often is mercurial like this, like that in the early days, people tell you why these big changes are impossible, even if they're admirable. And then some people just find a way to do it anyway, knowing that, if we're certain we're on the right side of an issue, then we will get there. And we've often seen how change comes very suddenly, sometimes in the bleakest moments. So we're trying to point the way. And I guess the question put to the three of us speakers today, how people of faith can respond to nuclear modernization. And I think, we've had these really wonderful perspectives, and Sebastian telling us really what the nuclear modernization program is all about, and some of the specific programs, including around Sentinel, that really do threaten us all, and why. And Vicky for telling so many stories so well about the power of local action. I really like the overview of how local movement in the Reagan administration advanced and changed and adapted to find a way. And so my answer to the question, how we can respond, I mean, not just as people of the faith community, but more generally first is to support the treaty, basically. I mean, and that's what I'll tell you more about. But first learn more about it, understand it, and find a way to respond to sort of the dominant US narrative, I think, in a lot of media circles and inside Beltway circles that want to tell us that it's not realistic, because of course it's realistic. It's just that people are sort of calcified into their sort of framings of the way things were. And so I think it sometimes becomes an argument, but we have the better side of that argument. So I hope that's what you can do, is sort of join, if you haven't joined yet, to help tell that story, including through local actions and the tools that ICANN has. Vicky talked a little bit about things like the city's appeal. I'll try to get to that a bit as well. And Vicky asked me to talk about the New York one. The city's appeal being an initiative where we have cities in nuclear armed states or nuclear endorsing states, which is to say, NATO states and countries that host nuclear weapons and countries that are in the so-called nuclear umbrella. But cities in those countries that reject the treaty right now, but where citizens in those in the major cities in those countries can say, that we support the treaty, and especially in democracies, we believe that we should be heard on this. After all, it's cities that are most threatened. Sebastian talked I think some of the modeling, some of the research that he's done around the modeling of what happens when silos are attacked demonstrates how everyone is at risk. But we also know that, of course, some of the primary targets for nuclear weapons are almost all of them are cities, or because these are not weapons of war, they're weapons of terror, and they serve no military function. They just exist basically to destroy humanity. That's their only real utility. And by the way, we have hundreds of cities around the world that have joined the ICANN Cities Appeal, including, I think, almost around 75 in the US, but none in New Jersey. So perhaps that's something that can be taken up by some of the people here. Similarly, the ICANN Pledge, which is a kind of a similar concept. It's where parliamentarians or Congress people will say that they support the treaty. Relatedly, encouraging your Congress people to come to the third meeting of states parties. I'm going to talk a little bit about more about that too. In terms of faith-based initiatives, of course, I think many of you would know that we have, first of all, I think faith-based groups have always stood behind nuclear abolition in some fashion. But we've recently had a lot of unity from faith-based groups around the ban treaty, the TPNW. The World Council of Churches being one example. That's a fellowship of 350 something churches in 120 countries, I think, or something like this, that has endorsed the treaty and says they stand united behind it. In the Catholic Church, the Pope has been a leader, Pope Francis of the treaty, and the Holy See, one of the leading states behind the treaty. And we've seen other people of faith from non-Christian, from the Dalai Lama to Soka Gakkai, and these are some of our loudest and most influential advocates. So there's many things that can be done, I think, for people of faith, and it starts by, I think, standing united with others who support the treaty. So I do have some slides I can start, but I think I'll probably skip around with them because first I have to find them. There we go, I think. Can I confirm that that's visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so I will skip around, I think, from what I said, because I have a lot to say, and I thought I'd just try to build on what others have already said. And Sebastian set up so well, I think, the state of the US modernization program and the risks associated with that. And Vicky, too, helped us, I think, make connections to certainly to the climate crisis and what Warheads to Windmills is doing to try to address these issues in a holistic way, the way they need to be addressed. And so perhaps I'm going to skip ahead to focus on more about the treaty, what we're doing internationally, and the path to a solution. But I just have to get through a few of these slides to get there. So I will just, let's see. Is that working? There we go, I think. So I often, if I'm speaking to, depending on who I'm speaking to, would like to spend some time on context. But again, I think perhaps that's not as necessary here. I think perhaps many of you are familiar with the doomsday clock and the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, it was advanced to their metaphorical 89 seconds to midnight. For some, this is a very good way to contextualize what risk is. And they give us many explanations of why they got there and how they got there, who they are. But the general idea being that with this resetting of their clock, that the most prominent experts in on the issues of how close is humanity to its own self-destruction think that we are closer than we have ever been, including during the height of the Cold War. And this is a chart that doesn't actually go to 2024, or 2025, I should say, for some reason but it's basically tracking the where the clock has been over the years. And I think, yeah, Sebastian's Missiles in Our Land presentation really helps us answer why the risks are increasing, and how the modernization program and the vulnerabilities in our systems pose one aspect of risk, and why we have, even though we have fewer nuclear weapons than we did at the height of the Cold War. In the mid 1980s, the world had, 60, over 64,000, as I recall, nuclear weapons, and now, now we're on the order of somewhere in the 12,000 to 13,000 range. But the number is not the only issue, and when you look at who has them, what they're doing with them, and plans for continuing arms control or lack thereof, that also helps tell the story of why risks have been so drastically increasing, and why we are in such a more dangerous moment right now. And we saw a lot of that happen during the last Trump administration. We saw a lot of the relevant treaties break down from the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and Sebastian talked about how New START has no prospects at the moment for renewal. But we've also already referenced some, and Vicky did as well, some of the statements from this new Trump administration that are making very bold claims around achieving nuclear disarmament, even in the past days. And so it's very difficult, I think, to predict some of what's going to happen in the next years. But I think we have to both, on one hand, understand what the risks are, and also understand where the opportunities are. And the flyer for this event and the introduction, you talked a lot about the modernization budget. Someone already put a question to Sebastian about DOGE and how it's horrendous, but maybe it could be directed to nuclear weapons programs. And indeed, that I agree. I think we have seen. And ICANN actually publishes this, the only report on nuclear weapon spending, and that tracks specifically who is spending what and how much. And we know that this modernization budget has been at various times put between $1 trillion and $2 trillion over the course of a couple of decades. But we know that we spent in the U.S. Far more than any other state in maintaining and expanding our nuclear arsenal at $51.5 billion in 2023. We haven't done the 2024 report yet. And that's more than half of what the total global nuclear weapons spending is. So yes, there are vast challenges with, I think, people who are progressives on this issue or any other issue with respect to the new presidential administration. And there's
glad you said about the
no
Morris. I'm
understating
also glad we stayed for the walk.
Sorry? Oh, sorry, I thought it was a question. Feel free, by the way, we can discuss anything around what I'm saying in real time if you want to interrupt me. But no, I was going to say that that yes, of course, we do not mean to. I certainly do not mean to understate or minimize the risks faced by so many right now, including especially in the most vulnerable communities. But that doesn't mean that there still won't be opportunities for progress, I think, and that's what we're trying to look for right now. And cost is certainly one of them. But I was thinking that, one thing we always do is help people frame this issue, not just by talking about, state security and who needs what and whether nuclear weapons deter, which is a conversation we're certainly prepared to have. But I think all of us have to always frame the question first with what nuclear weapons do, what they do to human bodies and to the environment. And thanks to people like Sebastian, scientists help tell this story. Thanks to people like Setsuko Thurlow, who Vicky spoke about, survivors help tell this story. And there's one film I often, well, there's a lot of examples of how we can tell the story, but there's sometimes I show this film that the ICRC, the Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross, made together with this kind of animation studio called Kurzgesagt. But Sebastian had some trouble with his sound when he shared his screen, so maybe I won't even bother with that. And I'll instead maybe put what in the chat, let's say, here, in case you want to go look at that later. Whoops, this is everyone. Okay. So this is a YouTube link to this video that I think is one very powerful way of really just telling the story of what happens when a nuclear weapon is detonated over a city. And I encourage you to watch it. It really speaks to the core of where we start with our message, which is that that the consequences of nuclear weapons would be so vast, so devastating, both in the immediate moments and in the long term, for so many reasons, that it illustrates perfectly that nuclear weapons are incompatible with both our morality and with international law. They so very clearly violate international humanitarian law, the rules of distinction and proportionality, superfluous injury, that we need, I think, to always be ready to push back against those who parse the legalities around it, because there is no legitimate use for nuclear weapons, and I think that has to be our starting point, because that's the only way that we can really convince people that elimination is the answer, that they don't deter, that they don't serve a legitimate security interest. I think some of the recent research, and I thought Sebastian can't talk about all his research. He's been involved, and so has Princeton, with so many aspects of what nuclear weapons are and what they do. But I think something that is only being really, I think, elaborated on in recent years has been fully understanding what happens to regions far away from where a detonation happens, because in many of you who have been working around this movement, say since the 60s and the 70s, are familiar, of course, with the concepts of nuclear winter. But some of the recent research has really, I'll just go through this quickly for now, but extrapolated and further elaborated what nuclear winter really means, and also helps us understand the nexus between climate chaos and nuclear weapons as the twin existential threats, because they are in a mutually spurring cycle of doom, in the sense that what we know is that nuclear weapons, when they are used, and this is the fundamental concept of nuclear winter, has the effect of after the firestorm that is ignited throughout, depending on the size of the detonation, throughout a potentially a vast region that lofts so much soot and debris into the upper atmosphere, the mushroom cloud sort of image, that it can block out the sun for potentially months or years even, in a way that causes and climate chaos that leads to famine, basically. And this is an article from the Nature Food from a couple of years ago that helps us understand what the longer term effects would be. So this is the context that I said I was going to go quickly through. But one more point to make in terms of this context, which is that we often talk about conflict being the real concern of nuclear weapons, that where they are used in conflict. But we shouldn't forget that the harms of nuclear weapons are not limited to an exchange in conflict. And for a U.S. audience, we should always take note of the fact that as U.S. citizens, we bombed ourselves first. And Sebastian, in fact, could have spoken about this. He didn't. I don't think he talked as much about his own study from 2023 that showed that the Trinity test, first detonation in the Manhattan Project, caused fallout to go farther than people had ever realized. And that's what his research illustrated, that using new his weather modeling software that I don't understand, but basic published results showing how the radioactive fallout reached 46 states and Canada and Mexico within the first 10 days of detonation. And so there have been over 2,000 tests, as this chart shows, of nuclear weapons around the world. And here again, the U.S. has led, I suppose you might say, the number of tests. And almost all of these tests have been done either in, the U.S. doesn't test in Virginia, right? And so the question to Vicky too about where we would restart testing if the U.S. restarts testing, I think your answer is correct, Vicky, that the Nevada test site is the one that is poised to reopen, as it were, if we were to, God forbid, start doing subcritical or atmospheric tests. But generally speaking, these tests are done over, indigenous populations, or and in other countries too, we see how countries tested over indigenous populations or places where they are places of their extended colonial influence, either in that time or since, in the sense that Russia tested in Kazakhstan, and the UK and in Australia, and the China in the Uyghur territories. And so the point being that it's not just our fear of exchange in a conflict, it's also the testing in the industry at large, that basically all of, not the downwinders, of course, from testing, but also those who are working in the nuclear weapons industry to maintain nuclear weapons, and how, as Sebastian's research shows, really puts so many at risk right now, even just preparing to use nuclear weapons or preparing not to use them, depending on which side of the deterrence argument you're on. So I have some background slides on some of the existing treaty structures, but I won't focus on that because I want to get to the TPNW. But I think the main one to cite, and I think you perhaps may be familiar with it, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which has been sort of the dominant paradigm for a long time, and does have obligations toward toward nuclear disarmament in Article 6, but we have seen how it's under a lot of strain, and how we have had the first 2 consecutive failures of review conferences of that treaty. And we're building towards this 2026 conference with not a lot of optimism for consensus. And so, in addition to the other multilateral frameworks that we noted are under quite a great deal of strain, this very fundamental, longstanding agreement is also quite under strain. And that's why we do think that the TPNW, even in its early days, is the key. And so here are some key points on the TPNW for the uninitiated. Negotiated and adopted in 2017. Vicky mentioned being in the room for it in 2017 when 122 states voted in favor. That was indeed one of the most exciting days of my life as well. And as we know from our last gathering, the treaty entered into force in January 2021. It is the first ever comprehensive global treaty-based ban on nuclear weapons that provides a legal framework for eliminating nuclear weapons programs. And not least, it is the first ever nuclear weapons treaty that provides assistance, or is dedicated to providing assistance for victims of nuclear weapons use and testing, and remediating environments that have been affected by nuclear weapons use and testing. And the theory of change, why it came about, is, I think, of in 3 categories: addressing humanitarian concerns, the notion that any use of nuclear weapons would be catastrophic, and elimination is the only answer. Filling a gap in international law that, as I said, this is the first such prohibition. And also, as I said, to get the rest of the world and galvanize the rest of the world to build pressure for disarmament. And I can elaborate a bit on this, but in each of these, to address humanitarian concerns, basically, there's nothing we can do, and we have no response to any use of nuclear weapons other than more use of nuclear weapons. And the only way to stop it is to prohibit them and eliminate them. This deterrence is not going to prevent use, and it is highly likely that it has not prevented use, but rather, as many of the experts who have been around during the most tense moments say, it has only been dumb luck that has kept us safe. And to fill a legal gap, so here, this is the second reason for the TPNW, but talking about how we've had every other weapon of mass destruction is prohibited, how the NPT that I just spoke about does not establish a categorical ban on nuclear weapons. And although we do have these comprehensive prohibitions from nuclear weapon free zone treaties, they are limited in geographic regions. Meanwhile, the CTBT, which prohibits testing, as we will mostly know, I think, is not in force. And in fact, we've seen the Russian Federation just withdraw its ratification for it. And so the idea, thirdly, is that we build pressure for disarmament, and that it's a prerequisite to prohibit before we can actually get there. History teaches us. So that's what we're doing. So let me just, I won't go through the whole treaty right now. And in fact, you can, of course, find it yourself. And Vicky showed her copy. This is my copy. I always keep it close as well. But the basic idea is the comprehensive prohibitions in Article 1, and then the elimination provisions, and then the victim assistance environmental remediation provisions. And then I can skip some of these legal details, I think, for now. And get to some of the exciting parts, because where we are now and where we want you to do is what I'd like to talk about. This is the trajectory of the treaty that we spoke about, and brings us to where we are right now, which is in a couple of weeks, we will have the treaty's third meeting of states parties. So what are those? I suppose perhaps some of you were engaged with or were even at the first meeting of states parties or the second meeting of states parties, so you would know. But under the treaty's terms, the countries that have joined it are required to meet and to take forward implementing the work of the treaty. And you can do this even before the nuclear armed states join, because there's a lot of threads of work that can be built before we even have the possessor states there. And a couple of highlights to note, at the first meeting of states parties, the states adopted this 50-point action plan. This was in Vienna in 2022, June 2022. And a very, I think, impactful declaration of states that sort of set the path in motion for the work that was going to be done under the treaty, because this Vienna Action Plan, which had 50 action points, actionized some of the intercessional work, some of the work that states, that countries would do to lead in a few areas. And I'll just talk about that I'll come back to that in a minute. And then there was a second meeting of states parties that was not last, but just November, December 2023, so just over a year ago, and was more of everything. There were, again, some of you were there, but we had 122 NGOs participate and more than 700 passes issued to civil society. It's a very exciting place to be, and the most progressive place to be in terms of civil society participation. So we hope you can be there. I'll talk to you a bit more about how you can participate in a second. But just to continue on how the treaty is doing, Vicky mentioned this, we have 73 states parties, plus a further 25 countries that have signed the TPNW so far. So this is kind of an exciting moment, because we say that we're at the halfway point. The number of states that could sign or ratify the treaty is basically double this. It means that the next one that comes, we will be in the majority, the global majority of countries that have become signatories or states parties. So when you talk about the power of collective action to make change, we have seen this in other global diplomatic processes, that once you have this reach certain critical wills, essentially, of states, these groups of states can act together. And the treaty actually actionizes, I'll talk about the universalization provisions, requires the states parties to take action together to influence change. And so this is an important way in which you build the framework for states to influence the possessor states. We talk about, we think in the US, we think about the US being such the dominant player in so many structures, but we have seen how states can influence even the most powerful states when they act together. And that's one thing that the treaty is doing. So who's coming? There's about 40 more states that have not yet signed or ratified the treaty, but who say they support it and are working towards ratification and joining the treaty themselves. And so for a very young treaty, it's definitely progressing, and especially in a circumstance where multilateralism is so tenuous these days, we are doing quite well. And the most recent signatories and states parties we saw come in September during the high-level week at the UN, and included Indonesia, which is the fourth largest country in the world by population, and is the largest country to join the TPNW. And a lot of times we talk about how nuclear armed states are so big and powerful, and how the biggest states in the world don't support it. Well, that's not actually true. I mean, of the 10 largest countries by population in the world, we have 5 that support it and 5 that don't. So I think there's definitely something we should think about from our very myopic place. I speak as a US citizen myself, that we sometimes don't see things from the global perspective, and that we know that there is support internationally, two-thirds of the world basically support it and are already making change. Further breakdowns about what this looks like regionally. You know, you see how Europe is the biggest challenge in terms of number of states, and that's because NATO has a current position against the treaty and has 27 states in Europe that are in NATO. By contrast, Africa is essentially universally supportive, and no state is known to be opposed. So I do want to talk about how we are having an impact already, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to highlight March, because this is maybe the biggest action to the question, what can we do? So I just want to talk about, I'm going to skip ahead to this for a second. So Nuclear Ban Week, March 2nd through 7th is happening in New York, not far from those of you who are in New Jersey. And there's really this those of you who have participated will know this. This may seem very obvious if you've participated in UN meetings, but just to set it up this way, there's multiple things happening both inside the United Nations and outside the United Nations. Inside the United Nations, there's the official third meeting of states parties happening, where the governmental meetings are taking place. That's 10 sessions, 2 a day for 5 days. And there's also side events happening alongside them. Many of those are led by states, but then there's many led by civil society. And we are, ICANN is the civil society coordinator for the meeting, so has basically coordinating all of these NGOs to participate and have their side events. And then there's programs happening outside the UN. We saw a lot of action last year, maybe a little less this year as we're in this third meeting and now building towards the first review conference, which will be probably in 2026 or 2027. And that will be the big show, but there's still a lot happening. This is just like I wrote out the agenda for like what's happening at the meeting in the governmental sessions. Just put that. So I won't go through everything here, but basically it's organized into thematic sections of work. And, you know, I should note for those of you who are looking to join, for the governmental meetings, the deadline has passed to register an organization. But if you are working with an NGO that's already registered for the meeting, that NGO could put you on their delegation until February 24th. So there's still time to do that. Or if you work with an NGO that has its own, you know, accreditation at the UN, say through ECOSOC or the DGC, you can enter the UN at least that way and at least go to the meeting, if not officially register. But so this is only relevant to some of you who may want still to participate. But just to say about this list and what's happening and what the governments are doing, you see that it's organized into sort of these sections where basically states, countries are going to report on the work that they're doing under different articles of the treaty. And not all of the articles are being worked on at the moment. And so the states had to prioritize. They did that through that Vienna action plan that I told you about. If you want to learn more about what they are working on, we go to all these meetings that they have and we track it. And I will send you to put the relevant ICANN webpage here in the chat where you can read more about what's happening. But essentially, there's 3 working groups, and one of them deals with Article 4, which is about verification of nuclear weapons disarmament. One of them is about Articles 6 and 7, which is about the victim assistance and environmental remediation under the treaty. One of them is about Article 12, which is about universalizing the treaty, like how states work together to get more states to join and to get to sort of also spread the norms of the treaty. In addition to that, there's a focal point to address gender-related issues under the TPNW, which we could speak at length about as well, a very exciting thread of work. And then there's also another thread of work on that's supposed to address issues around how the TPNW complements other instruments and other security architecture, including, say, the NPT. And then there's a new thread of work that was actionized at the second meeting of states parties, that appointed a coordinator, which is Austria in this case, to address what we call a consultative process to articulate the legitimate security concerns of states parties. But you could also think about it as basically a thread of work that's meant to say, in response to nuclear armed states that are always saying, well, of course we want to see the eventual elimination of nuclear weapons, but the security environment is not ripe for us to take that forward. Now you have a process for the rest of the world to say, right, but what about our security interests? As the vast majority of the world, we are threatened by you saying that, you need to maintain your nuclear weapons. And here's why. So the week at large, we also have on our website, I'll post this, sort of the full calendar of events, including things that are happening inside and outside the UN. One event that I was hoping just to highlight for you, because maybe there's still an opportunity for action here. On March 2nd, we are having the what we call the parliamentary conference, where parliamentarians who have express support for the TPNW, even if they're in especially if they're in state countries that don't support the TPNW, gather. And we've held 2 of these already. Last year, and thanks a lot to the work of Vicky and people that she works with, we had our first U.S. congressperson join this conference, Jim McGovern from Massachusetts. This year, it's a little trickier because Congress is in session. The U.S. Congress is in session, so it's been trickier to get a U.S. congressperson to come. But there's still that opportunity. So March 2nd, if you think you can get, I guess your representative is Norcross, perhaps, for a lot of you. If you want to talk to his office about coming, then talk to me, and I will help you make the pitch. And of course, I suppose some of you are from other districts as well. And so they're not far from New York. They could perhaps make an appearance and get to DC later that day. It would be hugely impactful for them to join the meeting and for them to join the parliamentary pledge that I talked about. Another event, just to mention, is the Campaigners Forum that's happening outside of the UN, but like ICANN is basically gathering civil society the day before the meeting begins, just to have people knock heads together before the meeting starts and get excited and build strategy for the week ahead. That event is also difficult to access in that we've already sold out the tickets, but there is a wait list, and we can certainly try and get in as many people as we can. It's at Riverside Church on the Upper West Side of New York. As I mentioned, 3rd through 7th, there's the week. That's when everything's happening. And I've broken it down this way. I forgot to talk about ICANN, who we are. Let me come back to that in a second, but I just wanted to first say, maybe in closing here, just as I mentioned, and Vicky asked me to talk more about New York's ICANN Cities Appeal that I worked on, where we also had a divestment component, and we also reinforced and renewed New York City's nuclear weapon free zone status, and built a very unique committee that's governmental and non-governmental in New York City is the Nuclear Disarmament Committee that's supposed to advance the work of New York City's nuclear weapons free zone status. So that's one thing. Like I said, we have nobody in New Jersey has joined the city's appeal. You don't have to make it as much as the New York one. You could just have your mayor declare, or your city council declare that your town, municipality, or city supports the TPNW. And yeah, we can join the 900 cities or so around the world that have done so. And with such strong ties in your community, especially to work that's being done in Princeton and elsewhere, I hope that that's a possibility. The legislative pledge, the ICANN pledge, we talked about Donald Norcross potentially, the divestment work, universities work. There's a lot we can talk about in terms of local action, certainly, and also some of the federal bills. Vicky mentioned the one about the Eleanor Holmes Norton bill. There's a couple of bills that generally support the TPNW that are in Congress and that are good ways to galvanize, I think, national support as well. And that's mostly what I wanted to say. And just to say that we are a coalition at ICANN of NGOs. Today we have almost we're somewhere in the range of 700 NGOs in 110 countries that are part of the coalition. And any other one can join as well, as long as you use nonviolent action to support nuclear abolition through the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And yes, we won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for our work to raise awareness for any about the devastating consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, and for our efforts to advance the TPNW that I was just talking about. And yes, we do have we do keep it in New York, or we trade it around, but we have it here for the next meeting of states parties, and that's it. So come to New York to have selfies with it and such as well. We really look forward to collaborating with you further and to all your support. And if you have any questions, here's my email. You can follow ICANN, of course, at icanw.org. And you can follow on all the socials. We are #NuclearBan. And I am at Seth Sheldon on the socials as well. So thank you very much. And it's great to be with you today.
Questions, Joe?
Yeah, we have a few questions for you, Seth. Okay. The first one is from Jeff Laurenti. What should one infer from the experience of the Landmine Prohibition Treaty about the effectiveness of prohibition treaties without monitoring, inspection, and enforcement provisions?
Sure. Well, I should first say that the TPNW is modeled after what we call the humanitarian disarmament treaties that preceded it. And that includes the Landmines Treaty, Cluster Munitions Treaty, that helped reframe and took forward a whole new theory of lawmaking, international lawmaking, to reframe the question of why a state would have these weapons or not have these weapons, framed in terms of their own security versus framed in terms of human rights and IHL more broadly, and thinking more about human security and humanitarianism writ large, I guess. And so what we saw with some of these treaties is, in a similar fashion, and this was, again, a great deal of inspiration for those pushing for the nuclear ban treaty, because nuclear abolitionists, as I said, for decades, and this was the real new vision of ICANN, was to sort of modify this. In the past, we had always looked for leadership from nuclear armed states. All of the attention was focused on, how can we make you lead on these treaties? And of course, that's a very worthy effort. You certainly need the US and Russia to be involved in their disarmament. But the theory changed and following the Landmines Treaty to say maybe there is an effect on norms and stigma that can be brought about and make change even before those possessor states are ready to join. And so we saw with those treaties how, for example, take cluster munitions, which no doubt is now under quite a deal of strain as well, but was enormously impactful in taking the rug out from both the political utility of building and using cluster munitions, as well as the financial profit model of building and maintaining them. And in that sense, the US, which opposed the treaty, never joined the treaty, was nevertheless very clearly affected by the treaty, in the sense that after years of its implementation, we saw that no one wanted to make them anymore. They posed and Vicky talked a lot about the impact we can have in the private sector in a similar fashion. The last producer of cluster munitions in Rhode Island in the US shuttered its portfolio for cluster munitions not because the US joined the treaty, which they hadn't, but because no one was buying. And it changed the entire perspective internationally around the utility of nuclear weapons, of cluster munitions. Now, I concede that this is not that can't be the whole story. And we saw, of course, in Ukraine, how the US sent cluster munitions to Ukraine. But it should be noted that those were stockpile weapons, that the US had not been producing more. And obviously, this is not the entire fight having been won, but it's still a very significant, I think, effect that the treaty had in limiting and eventually eliminating, I think, cluster munitions. And we know that there's going to always be challenges, and we saw how Lithuania has now withdrawn from the treaty. But I think it's always going, nothing is ever over fully, and we always have to make our case and show how, in the case of landmines and cluster munitions, it makes absolutely no sense for countries to pursue this for any reasons of security, because the ones that are most threatened by these weapons are their own citizens. And just helping people make that case, we believe, is winning the day and eventually will win the day.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Next question. In the 1980s, the movie The Day After was shown to widespread interest. Is there any enthusiasm to review the films or to produce others of the same theme?
Yeah, I think, boy, the phenomenon of The Day After is so fascinating to me, and really speaks to the story of art and culture colliding with politics and the influence that art can have on decision makers. There's a new movie, a documentary, in case you've heard of it, although now it's slipping my mind, about the day after television event, it's called, where we've been working with the filmmakers there to promote it. And I knew a lot about, I thought, The Day After, but it really elaborates on the story of how impactful it was, and not just on culture, but specifically even on Reagan himself, as many of you would know, and how he gave credit to the movie for changing his own view about the utility of nuclear weapons and the necessity to move to arms control instead of what he had been doing in terms of Star Wars and expansion before then. And it's a very powerful story, of course, and to me is made especially so by the fact, and please pardon me if I ever speak again to the filmmakers, that I think it's a terrible movie. I think it's, like, in terms of its production values, it does not hold up over time, certainly. And of course, that was a limitation of television movies back then too. They, I think, by modern standards, don't look so great, and it's kind of meandering and has a lot of many storylines. So the fact that could have had such a powerful impact is astonishing to me. And I think if you watch the movie on YouTube, let's say the day after, which I did a few years ago, at the top of the sort of list of movies you may also want to watch, or something like this, or videos you may also want to watch, was, and many of you may recall this if you watched it in real time, the program that came on immediately after The Day After, which was a panel that was, if I recall, was moderated, I think, by Ted Koppel, and had on it Carl Sagan, Henry Kissinger, Bill McNamara, I think, and Bob McNamara, sorry, and yeah, maybe a couple of other people, like the most important people in politics and culture, who were just on television right after the movie came out, right after the movie was shown, to say, you know, and zooms in on Ted Koppel to say, what you have just seen is not real, but it could be. And then they all talked about nuclear disarmament and, you know, and US policies. And so to the question, will we see that kind of momentum again? I think we are seeing it. I think, you know, Oppenheimer, though I have my critiques, is one example of how nuclear weapons is in, again, in the human consciousness, and how art is imitating life. People are talking about nuclear weapons more, in particular in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine for the last few years, and art takes a little while to come about. But we have seen more films in the pike that have not yet been made that also tell some of these stories, and I'm confident that this will be overall useful for us, because anyone who learns more about nuclear weapons and what they do is ultimately pointed to the wisdom of our strategy. And this is not just true for cinematic arts, but also, you know, let's say in visual arts. Right now, we're working with a network of visual artists, and have, together with a Mexican artist named Pedro Reyes, have built this basically, it's called Artists Against the Bomb, and a group of visual artists around the world that are helping to tell the story of nuclear abolition and promote the treaty and ICANN. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful that people are newly seized of this issue and are pointed in our direction. And that even if, and I think that if you've been around the movement for a while, you're sort of, and you're waiting to see 1 million people in the streets the way we did in June 1982, we have to be open to the fact that not everything works the same, and that people can be effective in their activism in different ways than they were then. So we don't necessarily need 1 million people in the streets, but we, you know, if we have, you know, 100 people in the halls of power, I think it could also be very very effective as well. So we shouldn't be too despondent about the fact that culture hasn't necessarily taken up our priorities yet. That's a long answer to that question, but sorry. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. I have one more question. It's a two-part question. Are there some UN nations that need a nudge or a push to ratify the UN treaty? And is there a finite number of nations that might be needed to demand an end of nuclear weapons?
Well, the answer to the second question is yes, but we just don't know what that number is yet. When we can only do that in the retrospective, I think, and say, aha, it was 137. And then, you know, once we have this nuclear armed states on board, we don't know exactly what that number will be. And is there a push that's needed for certain UN states? Yes, for the 98 other states that haven't yet taken action, as well as the 25 states that have signed but not yet ratified. We are working in every one of those states in different ways. Obviously, our activism looks a lot different, say, you know, in Germany versus China. But we have groups, like I said, in 110 countries that are helping push, and I do my work at the UN and meet with diplomats to push. We want to advance signature and ratification processes for all the states that are supportive, and we want to change the perspectives of those that are not supportive. And that includes getting them to observe, like at this third meeting of states parties, countries that are not yet ready to join, or even that don't support the treaty, are welcome to show up to the meeting as observers. And this, just doing that, even engaging with these the global majority here, is helpful. So depending on what country you're working in, we have a task for you. I assume most of us are in the US, but if you have, if you want to know the status of any particular country, we have, you know, there's basically me and 2 other people like me that coordinate the work of all the campaigners around the world that are basically trying specifically to get their states to advance the ratification process. And so we know, I think, a lot of, sometimes more than governments may themselves know, about where things are in the portfolios, where they are in cabinets and parliaments. And yeah, we need, I mean, it's urgent. It's not moving fast enough, but I think it still is moving pretty fast given the, I think, international environment.
We have time for one more question. Okay. We have one more question. I'm sorry. What were the deal breakers at the 2022 NPT review conference that prevented agreement on the concluding statement?
There is what's reported, and then there is what happens in that small room of states that are negotiating the final outcomes. And so it's never fully clear, but I think, time and reporting usually bears out what at least academia and society and people who can later testify to these things will say. For example, we, know that a prior review conference failed because of the issue of the Middle East weapons of mass destruction free zone and failures to agree on language around that. But yeah, this 2022 one, reportedly, it was mostly focused on the Russia-Ukraine related issues, including language around Zaporizhia, the nuclear power plant, and Russia's recalcitrance on some of these issues to agree to let in language that condemned attacks on nuclear energy power plants. Now, this could be this could be more of a Western framing I have for it. That's why I'm sort of hesitant to say that I don't know actually what, this is what states will say in the meeting afterwards, that it was due to one state's refusal to agree. And it very well may be true. It's just that I think that it's hard to know for certain that that was the explicit issue, and it wasn't more about larger disputes happening between NATO and Russia, let's say. We do know that those were at least if Zaporizhia wasn't the issue, at least those were the states that were having those fights anyway, whatever the issue was.
All right.
Okay. Am I on TV?
Yes, you are.
I am. Okay, well, let me introduce myself. I'm Steve McGady, and I'm a member of the Sacred Heart Peace Community. And I would like to say a few words in closing. And first of all, I would like to thank our speakers. I think most of you would agree with me that this was a very wonderful program with excellent speakers and a good deal of very valuable information. Secondly, let me thank all of you who attended, and we appreciate you coming, and I hope you'll be back next year when we have another gathering. By the way, we've had these gatherings going back into the early 2000s. Our first one was in response to the proposed invasion of Iraq in 2003, and we will be having one next year as well. That having been said, let me acknowledge that at this point in time, it's rather easy to be discouraged. We had an event yesterday in Philadelphia in which it says Sheldon's million people in the street turned out to celebrate the Super Bowl victory of the Philadelphia Eagles. For this conference, we have fewer than 100 people signed up. So there is work for us to do to try to capture some of the enthusiasm, some of the causes for enthusiasm that got motivated so many people yesterday. It's easy to understand the difference. Yesterday was a celebration, and today is a much more sober undertaking. And who doesn't like a celebration? So I think that accounts for a lot of what we have seen. I think we have to fall back for a moment on the quotation that is attributed at times to the parliamentarian Edmund Burke in the 18th century. And he said to have said that for evil to succeed, it is only necessary for good people to do nothing. And this conference today was aimed at people of goodwill. And we are a faith-based organization, but you don't have to be part of a faith-based organization to be of goodwill. That's an individual thing. And I hope that many of us will be motivated by what we've seen and heard today. We sometimes get discouraged about the oligarchs and people, corporations with considerable means contributing money and influencing political process in outsized ways. But let's not lose sight of the fact that the only way that money helps politicians is that it helps them to manipulate the people. And they do this by advertising in a variety of ways. And of course, advertising has become a highly refined science today. They're very good at it, and they are quite effective. But if people have taken made up their minds that they feel a certain way, those manipulations are not going to be as effective, and the money becomes less important in the equation. So let us not lose sight of the fact that the power resides with us. Lastly, let me say that I hope that the suggestions given today and the presentations that we've heard will energize individuals to give witness to the dangers of nuclear weapons and of the need to control and eliminate them to a considerable extent. And I think that's something that we've heard lots of suggestions on how we can do that. And from this point, we just have to move forward. Thank you again for attending. Thank you to our speakers. You were quite wonderful. Bye now.